Your Excellency, I'm hoping the mic is working, it seems to be. Your Excellency, Director Generals, youth leaders, fellows, distinguished guests, and ladies and gentlemen, welcome to 50 Sussex Drive for this special event exploring sustainability in the Arctic. The Royal Canadian Geographical Society is delighted to be collaborating with the Royal Norwegian Embassy in Ottawa today at Canada's Centre for Geography and Exploration. Here on the traditional unceded territory of the Anishinaabe peoples, and I further acknowledge and recognize that the Society's work reaches across all the distinct First Nations, Métis homelands, and Inuit Nunavut. And for this we are most grateful. I'm John Geiger, the Executive Director, I've just degraded my role. I'm the Chief Executive Officer of the Royal Canadian Geographical Society and Canadian Geographic Enterprises. Given the very nature of my position, I have an abiding passion for Canada's north and polar regions in general. I have a personal affection for the Arctic, having written my first book, which was called Frozen in Time, The Fate of the Franklin Expedition. That was written, I hate to say this, but nearly 35 years ago. And I am proud also to have received Canada's Polar Medal. The RCGS and the Royal Norwegian Embassy have a rich collaborative relationship that reflects our country's long-standing diplomatic ties as pioneers in polar exploration and science and as modern Arctic nations and policymakers. In 2017, we were honored to celebrate with the ambassador's predecessor, Ann-Kari Hansen-Ovind, the presentation of the first ever English translation of legendary Norwegian explorer Roald Amundson's expedition diaries to the speakers of the House of Commons and the Senate. And that presentation was made here at 50 Sussex Drive. The following year, in conjunction with the Embassy, we were privileged to host Lessons from the Arctic, an important exhibit honoring Amundson's accomplishments, which of course include being both the first person to traverse Canada's Northwest Passage and also the first person to reach the South Pole. Crucial to both achievements was Amundson's willingness to engage with and learn from Canada's Inuit. It's a remarkable exhibition. It's still traveling, I believe, and I'm hoping that at some point or another, all of you will have a chance to see it, and if not, at very least to visit the Fram Museum in Oslo, which is truly a global treasure with respect to polar exploration. I'd be remiss not to mention our pleasure in having Guy Clover, director of, indeed, the Fram Museum, and a great friend and fellow of the Royal Canadian Geographical Society here at 50 Sussex to speak on a number of occasions. So all these collaborations, like today's, are fitting connections to our shared interests and priorities and to our ongoing relationship. With all that said, I'm truly honored to introduce His Excellency John L. Vidal Fredriksson, Norway's Ambassador to Canada. Your Excellency.
Thank you, John, and thank you, all of you, for being here today. My name is John Fredriksson. I'm the Norwegian ambassador to Canada, as was said, and I've been in Canada for a year now, a little more than a year. And this is actually the first chance I have to host an event in person, except for a few meals. So I'm really excited to be here today. So welcome to this half day of Arctic Talks. It's really exciting to host a live event, as I said, but also a big welcome to all of those who are following us online on both sides of the Atlantic. So the Norwegian Embassy organizes an event in Canada on the Arctic. So why would we do that? I would say because we all care. We, both Canadians and Norwegians, we know the vital importance of this region for both our countries and for all our Arctic neighbors. We know that this is a region that is mighty, it has global impact, it's full of resources, it's full of possibilities, but it's also terribly fragile, especially in the face of human impact. And I think we know this now better than before. So we need to talk about the Arctic, I think, wherever we can and in all formats, and to touch about all the topics that we need to address when dealing with this very, very important region. What we would like to do today is to give our Canadian friends a taste, or if you're already familiar with Arctic politics, as many of you are, a reminder of why and how the Arctic matters to Norway. And to hear from our Canadian partners their thoughts and policies seen from this side of the Atlantic. We have followed the lead of the many Norwegian government strategies through the years, 2 decades, I would say, and taken a broad approach to the event today. We will be hearing from our political masters, from academia, civil society, and I'm especially excited that we have with us today 2 young people who I know will give us some clear-headed advice when they meet on stage later. So, I will not go into more substance right here and now. We will start today's event with a 10-minute film that has been produced especially for today's event. In this film, we will present the Norwegian High North and the key messages related to its development. After that, our esteemed moderator, award-winning journalist Alana Mitchell, will guide us through the rest of the day. Thank you, everyone.
In the Arctic region of Norway stands some of the world's most expansive landscapes, mountainous regions, vast coastlines, and abundant wildlife. These unique natural settings are matched by vibrant urban centers, home to some of Norway's finest research facilities and learning institutes. Canada and Norway are among the 8 countries within the Arctic Circle. Often called the Land of Midnight Sun, the area above the Arctic Circle accounts for 35% of Norway's mainland and is home to 9% of our population of 5.5 million people. The indigenous Sami people can be found across the region and in neighboring countries, carrying with them ways of life that have been passed down over generations. Vital industries remain an important part of the region's identity, with fisheries, tourism, IT services, and innovative maritime technologies experiencing a decade of strong growth in the north.
Arctic cooperation is really a high priority for Norway, and we continue to work with our friends and partners around the world to mitigate the impact of climate change and to foster innovation in the region. And I must say, there are a lot of optimism in the northern part of Norway. Our businesses and our research institutions are working really hard to create green and blue business and green and blue technology. And this is a part of the struggle to preserve this unique region for future generations.
In the Norwegian Arctic, our domestic policy and our foreign policy are closely intertwined. The Arctic matters to Norway, to Canada, and increasingly, to the rest of the world. Globally, there are around 4 million people currently living in the circumpolar Arctic, with around 10% being indigenous populations and around 10% living in the Norwegian Arctic. The population in northern Norway has been growing, but is facing the same urbanization trend as the rest of the world, with some people moving to bigger cities in other parts of the country. New solutions are needed in order to foster viable and attractive communities, including building more sustainable infrastructure and environmentally friendly towns and cities for the future.
So the Norwegian government aims to support the development of cultural activities, recreational activities, and sports activities to make the High North a really attractive place to live in and to make local communities thrive.
Attractive towns and cities serve many important purposes, attract people and businesses, and contribute to population balance between regions. Creating them requires joint efforts by national and local governments to encourage compact and pleasant towns with attractive physical surroundings, lively downtown areas, a variety of housing options, and sustainable transportation. Northern Norway is home to some of our leading academic and research institutions, with important focus areas like marine research, fisheries, natural resource management, climate change, environmental research, Arctic innovation, and sustainable ocean-based industries. This is the heart of the blue economy. With university education that is tuition-free for both national and international students, Norway is able to attract bright minds from all over the world, fostering continued growth and prosperity for the next generation of innovators. Norway's ambassador to Canada completed his graduate studies at the Arctic University of Norway in Tromsø.
The city of Tromsø is known as the Paris of the North, so it really has everything a student could desire in his or her life. The university has several centers of excellence, and I know that the university is also working closely with several Canadian universities. So no offense to the Ivy Leagues of this world, but I couldn't think of a better place for a young person to study than in Tromsø.
In 2020, Norway set up a youth panel to provide input and recommendations for developing Norway's Arctic policy for the future. The panel's report made it clear that young people want to be included more widely in international cooperation in the Arctic. Engaged youth also noted the need to enhance the framework for education and skill development in the outlying districts and to improve conditions for young entrepreneurs in the North, including ensuring better access to capital. Norway intends to promote closer cooperation between the business community and the higher education sector with the goal of increasing the number of attractive jobs in the North. Although northern Norway is much smaller than Canada's northern territories, developing infrastructure can be a challenging and daunting task. High transportation costs and unpredictable weather conditions may pose discouraging obstacles for new businesses that are hoping to settle. Digitalization and innovation are key to moving forward. The rollout of 5G networks will soon boost access to public services and ease of doing business in northern Norway. Modernizing and improving infrastructure can support and create new jobs in urban centers in the north, and this must be encouraged through both legislation and funding. To improve connectivity, a majority in Parliament has supported extending the Nordland Railway line all the way to Tromsø.
Norway and Canada are both seeing a huge increase in traffic within the Arctic. We know that the fishing fleets are moving further north with the climate change. We have seen a dramatic increase also in the cruise traffic, and that really impacts the environment. And we also see new routes are being developed. I think this demands from both our countries that we really work with environmental issues and work with transportation issues to have a sustainable future in the Arctic.
This rise in maritime activity could increase the frequency of accidents, which is why the Norwegian government has appointed a committee to consider new search and rescue related challenges. A new test facility will be built, and the towing capacities will be strengthened in the north. Internationally, the Arctic Coast Guard Forum works to foster safe, secure, and environmentally responsible maritime activity in the Arctic. Norway has strong and well-established relations with all our neighbors in the north, including broad-based cooperation in areas such as fisheries, research, the environment, search and rescue, nuclear safety and security, health, education, business, energy, and not least culture, people-to-people contacts, and indigenous issues. Dialogue across borders is crucial.
So the Arctic region is a peaceful region and is guided by the same laws that applies everywhere else. And I would especially like to mention the UN law of the high seas. And also the Arctic Council is the main body for peaceful cooperation in the region, with the participation of all 8 Arctic nations of 6 indigenous organizations recognized by the Council.
The Arctic Council's mandate is to cover issues relating to climate change, the environment, and sustainable economic development. The United Nations Convention of the Law of the Sea provides the fundamental framework when it comes to environmental protection, research, international borders at sea, and shipping. Norway supports cooperation with non-Arctic states based on respect for international law and within the framework of existing cooperation structures. Other regional organizations, such as the Euro-Arctic Barents Cooperation and the Northern Dimension Cooperation, are also active in the region with Norwegian participation. However, the current security climate globally, the search for marine resources, and the importance of the Arctic as a laboratory for climate change are leading to growing international interest in the region.
Of course, there are security issues arising in the Arctic from climate change and from a lot of out-of-area attention. The notion that some people have that the Arctic is a sort of a lawless frontier is simply not true, and that should not guide anyone's view of the region.
To counter misconceptions of the Arctic, Norway engages globally to inform and share our perspectives. Public policy papers and open discussion in Parliament are also meant to make Norwegian strategy in the Arctic transparent and accessible to all. Norway and Canada are both founding members of the NATO alliance. We conduct military exercises and training in the north, which, together with our international allies, are a sign of solidarity and important to maintain security and peace in the north and elsewhere. As close allies, Norway and Canada work to keep the Arctic stable and peaceful. Rising global temperatures continue to impact fragile ecosystems and communities within our Arctic regions. The Arctic is warming at more than twice the global average rate, and the effects are clearly visible. The extent of the sea ice is shrinking, snow and glaciers are melting, the permafrost is thawing, precipitation patterns are changing, and wildfires are becoming more frequent. It is vitally important that the world succeeds together in achieving the long-term temperature target of the Paris Agreement. Everyone and every country must contribute.
As maritime nations, all the 8 Arctic states have a special responsibility to engage in having healthy oceans and productive oceans. Norway and Canada are deeply engaged in this work, and both our prime minister sit on the high-level ocean panel. And this is really a unique initiative. You have 14 world leaders that have come together, and they are really working to foster sustainable production, protection, and prosperity for all.
To avoid losing the Arctic as we know it today, we must find a proper balance between the exploitation and protection of land and marine resources. The cooperation between Norway and Russia on fishery management in the Barents Sea is a great example, which has become known as the best managed cod stock in the world.
So I'm really pleased that both Norway and Canada have signed the agreement to reduce unregulated fisheries in the Central Arctic Ocean, and that we're also both on the forefront of the Arctic Council's initiative to reduce plastic litter in the Arctic Ocean. The Canadian and the Norwegian Coast Guard, they operate really closely in a number of fields, also operationally, and they work with other countries as well in the Arctic Coast Guard Forum. So, as Norwegian ambassador to Ottawa, I would really like for Norway and Canada to learn from each other to the benefit of the Arctic and to the benefit of our people who live in the north.
N'importe où. My name is Alana Mitchell. Je m'appelle Alana Mitchell. Je suis journaliste. I'm a Canadian journalist. I'm an author and a playwright. And I'm really glad to see you all here. Isn't it amazing to be in the same room with live people? It seems like a miracle in these days. I've spent a lot of time exploring and writing about the Arctic, even though I'm actually from the Canadian prairies. I mean, it seems a bit odd. And I just want to say that I think this is going to be a fascinating morning where we're going to explore some issues that I think we all really deeply care about. First, just to recap what the ambassador has said, we're going to explore what the Arctic, with our speakers, we're going to explore what the Arctic means to Norway and to Canada, and how the Arctic fits into the big global picture. And this is the story of an evolution in thinking, and one that is continually being reimagined as we learn more about what's possible in the North. In the middle of the morning, We're going to have the privilege of hearing the thoughts and passions of two articulate young Arctic citizens. And after that, we're going to dive deep into the state of northern research in both Norway and Canada from two of the finest Arctic researchers in the world. And then we're going to finish the session by hearing about the international political structures set up to protect the Arctic and promote its interests. And we should be done shortly after noon, just for those who are timekeeping. So first off, please welcome a presentation from Ivan van Petersen. He is a diplomat who has served in Norway's embassies to South Sudan, South Africa, and Germany in recent years. Mr. Petersen was appointed State Secretary in Norway's Ministry of Foreign Affairs last month, and he is going to tell us about Norway's priorities in the Arctic.
Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, it is a great pleasure for me to address this seminar. Many thanks to the Norwegian Embassy and the Royal Canadian Geographical Society for hosting. I wish I could be there with you in person, and I hope to visit Canada, Ottawa, very soon. Norway appreciates the close and constructive bilateral relationship with Canada, an important friend and ally. Cooperation between our two countries is made easier by the fact that we see eye to eye on a number of important issues, such as human rights, climate change, and the importance of multilateral cooperation and the rule of law. The global attention towards the Arctic is increasing, and coastal states, Norway and Canada have many common interests in the region. Sharing perspectives and facilitating close dialogue, like this seminar does, are as important as ever. The Arctic is at the very top of this government's agenda. Respect for international law and multilateral cooperation in fora such as the Arctic Council to uphold the region of low tension and stability remains at the core of our work. There's a robust governance structure in place that Arctic states have developed over time and that we want to strengthen. Our NATO membership and Norway's strategic location also shape our Arctic policy. Norway shares a land and maritime border with Russia, and we also aim to develop that bilateral relationship further on ocean resources, climate, and coastal issues. Our Arctic communities are witnessing the dramatic climate changes at first hand. The ice cap is melting, and air and water temperature are rising more rapidly than anywhere else in the world. Fully understanding the implication of this for our nations, our local Arctic communities, for nature and wildlife, and the global climate should be at the very top of our agenda. Knowledge and science must underpin everything we do. Canada and Norway have strong research communities that are well positioned to be at the forefront. As an example, our government aims to initiate climate cooperation between the countries that have boreal forests. The Norwegian Arctic is home to many modern communities, hubs of expertise and innovative businesses. We have a strong focus on the people who live, work and raise their children in the region. Ocean resources have throughout history always been important for local communities. Sustainable economic growth, job creation, education and opportunities for this young generation is important also to reverse population decline in many regions in the Arctic, including in Norway. New low-carbon technologies and creative green thinking is part of the solution. I look forward to having a close dialogue with Canada on a wide range of issues. Let me use this opportunity also to encourage Canadian and Norwegian partners to stay in touch and look for new areas of cooperation. I wish you all a great seminar and hope to see you soon. Thank you very much.
And next up, we're going to hear about Canada. How do we stand on Arctic matters? And our guide for the first part of this is Wayne Walsh. He is Director General of the Northern Strategic Policy Branch at Crown Indigenous Relations and Northern Affairs Canada, which is also known as CIRNAC. Along with many other files during his 2 decades in public administration, Mr. Walsh has provided leadership helping Canada develop Arctic and Northern policy framework, and he is joining us virtually. Welcome.
Thank you very much for the kind introduction. Thank you very much for the invitation to participate today. I'm coming to you from the traditional and unceded territory of the Algonquin and Anishinaabe people. So again, thank you. I'm going to spend a few minutes this morning just providing a bit of context, overview, and a status of where we're at with the implementation of the Arctic and Northern Policy Framework. Just struggling with my, there we go. So back in 2016, December 2016, the Government of Canada committed to co-developing a new Arctic and Northern Policy Framework with territorial, provincial, and Indigenous partners to replace Canada's Northern Strategy. And what's really important about that, or interesting about that, is that prior to that announcement, the government had appointed Mary Simon to be a special representative and go across the north to talk about Arctic issue and specifically on conservation. And in her interim report, she mentioned a couple of very important recommendations, and one of which was conservation surrounded by poverty does not address some of the social justice issues that she was hearing from Northerners. So it was really important to, while advancing important conservation initiatives to address the challenges of climate change and other challenges, it was also important to develop a comprehensive new strategy for the North and the Arctic. And what we were challenged with by our political partners was not just to come up with a new policy, but how we did it needed to be different. We really need to focus on the North for the North. And at the center of that was this co-development model, which was a new model for us, for the Government of Canada. And it was really focused on collaboration, collaborative drafting, collaborative policy development, and as you'll see, collaborative implementation of the policy. So the framework took a number of years to develop. We did extensive engagement with our partners. And then, as I mentioned, once those engagements came in and we had very well understood what we heard, we then sat down with our partners to actually co-develop the policy statement. So the policy statement, or the framework, is really made up of a number of different components. The first is what we call the policy statement, or the main body. And that was drafted with partners from federal, territorial, provincial governments and Indigenous partners in the three territories, Northern Quebec, Northern Manitoba, as well as Newfoundland and Labrador. There's an international chapter, which I believe the next speaker will speak to, Heidi, and that was led by the Department of Global Affairs, but again, using some of our permanent participants to the Arctic Council, played an instrumental role. We have sovereignty is an important aspect of, sorry about that, of the emerging North and Arctic, and the Department of National Defense developed that part of it. And then what's really unique about the policy framework is partner chapters. We've got partner chapters from the Government of Northwest Territories, Government of Nunavut, Inuit, Tapiri, Katatami, and others, Yukon government, Nunavut governments. And what those chapters do is, within the context of the framework, allows the partners to articulate their unique circumstances and unique perspectives, as well as their unique challenges. It's widely recognized that the challenges faced in Yukon territory, for example, are going to be vastly different than those that are faced in the north coast of Labrador, for example. So those partner chapters allowed for that articulation. So the framework itself, it's not a traditional policy statement per se. It is really a framework. It's guided by a vision statement that was developed by all our partners, strong, self-reliant communities working together for a vibrant, prosperous, and sustainable Arctic region at home and abroad, which expresses Canada's enduring sovereignty. So the goal really is, this policy framework is meant to be in place until at least 2030, if not beyond. And the idea is, by the end of the framework's lifetime, the question is, will we have, achieved the vision statement? And more importantly, what do we need to do to achieve that vision statement? And with that, the partners, we came up with 8 goals that were organized around thematic issues. And under each goal is a number of objectives that encompass broad social, environmental, and economic themes. And really, the partners were inspired and I think guided by the UN development goals. So for example, under the first objective of the first goal is to end poverty. I think, you know, for those of you who are familiar with the the UN Sustainable Development Goals, that is the first goal of the UN Sustainable Development Goals. So you could see that there is synergies there. So the idea now, in terms of the development or the implementation of the policies, what do we do together as partners to invest, develop initiatives, programs, policies that will achieve progress towards ending poverty, in this case, that would then, you know, help us eventually achieve the vision statement that was laid out by the partners. So moving forward, we've been working on the implementation of the Arctic and Northern Policy Framework, and what we've done is really taken 2 tracks. We've developed what we call a national framework, and what the national framework does is it allows us to share information with all our partners, so that people, our partners in Yukon Territory, for example, can hear what some of the priorities and initiatives that are taking place in Nunavut, for example, and vice versa. This culminates with an annual leaders meeting that is chaired by the Minister of Northern Affairs, Dan Vandal. And we bring everybody together where we really share information and results and lessons learned that partners are able to really appreciate. I think this was an important aspect of the co-development process. We are also now looking or working towards regional implementation, and this goes, I think, at the heart of the Arctic and Northern Policy Framework, that initiatives need to be local and meet local realities. And so we're developing investment plans that are tailored specifically to each of our partners' needs and priorities, and that is ongoing. Just a very quick snapshot, you will see that since the federal budget 2019 and since the announcement of the Arctic and Northern Policy Framework, the government of Canada has made some significant investments aimed at producing results against the goals and objectives laid out in the framework. I'm not going to itemize them here, but you know, it does give you a fairly good example. And with, you know, the Mary Simon now being Her Excellency, the Governor General, and we're expecting a speech from the throne today, we're hoping that there'll be further articulation of the government's priorities on the Arctic and future investments as we move forward. So I think that's about it in a nutshell. The framework was really, you know, what's unique about the framework, besides its, you know, comprehensive nature, is the collaborative approach that we took in developing the framework with our partners and in implementing the framework with our partners. Really, truly an approach of for the North, by the North. So I think with that, I will leave it at that. There's some examples of some of the priorities, and I will ask the organizers to share my deck so you can have a closer look. But in the interest of time and to foster good dialogue, I think I will leave it at that. Again, I want to thank you for your invitation. Masi cho miigwech kwinami.
Thank you very much. Next up is Heidi Kootz, and she is going to help us understand how Canada fits into this big international picture alongside Norway and the other Arctic nations. She has had a long career at very senior levels of Canada's public service, including ambassador to the Portuguese Republic and deputy consul general at the Canadian Consulate in New York. And she's here today in her capacity as senior Arctic official and Director General for Arctic, Eurasian, and European Affairs. Please welcome Heidi Kootz.
Bonjour tout le monde, ça m'a fait un grand plaisir d'être ici avec vous ce matin. Merci beaucoup pour l'invitation. My name is Heidi Kootz. I have the pleasure, honor, and daunting task of serving as Canada's senior Arctic official. And it is a real pleasure to be here this morning. Thank you to the Norwegian Embassy and the Royal Canadian Geographical Society for organizing this event today. I would say that my presentation will be quite brief, but I will probably make it even a little bit briefer because many of the words of Ambassador Fredrickson and Secretary of State Peterson, I'm going to use a lot of the same words, which will bring us all to the conclusion of this presentation that we have a lot of common interests. We share a lot of common values, and we have good and purposeful work to do together. I am particularly pleased to follow Wayne in his presentation because in my learning in this portfolio, I started in September. One of the things that is so deeply evident to me is the work on the Arctic and Northern Policy Framework that is so significant in its substance, but equally significant in the process that brought it forward in its co-development and as it moves forward in its co-implementation. And serving in the Department of Global Affairs, there can be nothing more meaningful and slightly daunting as having the opportunity to work on the Arctic, where that nexus between the domestic and the international becomes so very deeply and fundamentally clear. So I have a clicker, and I hope it works, and I apologize if it goes awry. We'll figure it out. As Wayne mentioned, in addition to within the body of the ANPF, the Arctic and Northern Policy Framework, there's a chapter, an international chapter that is embedded. We tried to follow closely the very same principles of that co-development, working with the Inuit Circumpolar Council, the Arctic Athabascan Council, and the Gwich'in Council International in its development, in a body that actually supports all of our work at Global Affairs internationally, called the Arctic Council, or the Arctic Council Advisory Committee. This statement here probably sums things up in terms of Canada's efforts on the international stage, and that is to work to strengthen our presence, our international leadership on Arctic and Northern issues as the region undergoes rapid environmental change and as international interest surges. I find when I talk about the Arctic, everyone in this room and abroad, hello everybody overseas, knows that the Arctic is not homogeneous. When we speak to an Arctic agenda, we all come at it from our own Arctic and Northern realities within our respective countries and our own experience. The Arctic for Canada is fundamental to our national identity. It's home to 137,000 Canadians, slightly less than the 4 million defined early for Norway, across 3 territories, 3 of our provinces. It represents 40% of Canada's land mass, and that's 25% of the global Arctic. Canada forms behind Russia. We are the 2nd largest Arctic state. Half of our Canada's northern population is Indigenous, and the territory is covered by modern treaties providing Indigenous ownership of land, access to resource development opportunities, and participation in land and resources management. So now you understand why it's so important that when Canada talks about the Arctic, that we talk about Indigenous knowledge, that we talk traditional knowledge, and partnerships. It is home, as others have signaled, to unique and ecologically important ecosystems, increasingly under threat from climate change, which, as we all know, is the North experiences climate change at a rate 2 to 3 times more intense than the global average. And of course, Canada's North is blessed with natural resources, gas, critical minerals, and rare earth elements. Okay, so just as Ambassador Frederick said, this is not a lawless territory. The Arctic is peaceful. It's a stable region grounded in internationally agreed rules and norms. There is a long history behind there. Wayne mentioned the beginning role of the Arctic Council and the seminal role of now Governor General Mary Simon in working with our partners in framing that Arctic Council and that initial framework. But of course, the extensive international framework involves the law of the sea, the UN Convention on the Law of the Sea, setting out states' rights, jurisdictions, and obligations in various maritime zones, the delineation of the outer limits of the continental shelf, navigation, managing natural resources, the protection of marine and other uses. The Arctic Council, I'll spend a couple minutes on a little bit later, is important in that context. The International Maritime Organization, the Arctic Coast Guard Forum, the Arctic Economic Council, and the various myriad players who are involved in keeping the region stable and secure. That being the case, the Arctic is also a geographically important region. The impacts of climate change are having a profound and permanent impact on the region, including sea ice reduction, degrading permafrost, more frequent and severe wildfires, and threat to the survival of wildfire species and ecosystems. These equate to considerable impacts on the ecosystem, the people, through traditions of the Arctic. At the same time, these open up opportunities for more transportation. It makes the Arctic waters more accessible, leading to growing international interest for Arctic shipping, fisheries, natural resources development. It's the home and the space for extensive forward-leaning research and activities. Of course, that activities also require that the region be more prepared in the areas of search and rescue, marine, environmental response, navigation, and enforcement measures come hand in hand. So in all of this, in Canada's Arctic and Northern Policy Statement, Canada has worked to ground its international approach. First of all, the well-used and important grounding of rules-based international order can be no more important than in the Arctic region. And so on, our first priority for Canada is to work and speak to the importance of rules-based international order, the importance of meaningful participation of Northerners, and in particular Indigenous peoples and youth who are framing the future of that region, and to strengthen bilateral cooperation, of course, with our Arctic partners, but also with our non-Arctic partners who share an understanding and like-minded vision for the Arctic region. Canada is also working to more clearly define our own Arctic boundaries through the definition of the outer limits of Canada's continental shelf in the Arctic Ocean, and to seek opportunities to resolve outstanding border issues. We also work to support a safe, secure, and well-defended Arctic and North, actively seeking to strengthen our cooperation and collaboration with domestic and international partners on safety, security, and defense issues. As we work to talk about more of Canada's international engagement in the North, it is actually a priority for Canada to get out and speak more about Canada, our priorities and our experience. And it's not just in the body of this person here, it's in the very deep field of government, federal, provincial, territorial, Indigenous youth representatives being out on the world circuit talking about Canada's experience and working together with partners as we move forward. Critical to us is a very fundamental focus on the human dimension, sustainable socioeconomic development, environmental protection, and climate change, and reinforcing the very importance of Indigenous knowledge. And foundationally, so many of those perspectives are grounded for Canada in our own process of reconciliation. The Arctic Council, you'll hear more from my colleagues from the Arctic Council Secretariat and my colleague that I look forward to popping up on screen, the Norwegian Senior Arctic Official, Morten Hagland. Of course, the Arctic Council is very near and dear to Canada, to Norway, and to all of our partners as the preeminent organization to advance the sustainable socio and economic development and environmental protection and cooperation of the North. For Canada, we will focus in that body on the human dimension, enhanced climate change action, meaningful participation of Indigenous peoples, grounding Indigenous knowledge, and supporting better decision-making to provide our communities with the tools that they need. So this is a slide that would have been a big grand reveal slide for you, but Ambassador Frederickson already mentioned so many of these points. The reason that it's so easy for us to be in this forum is because there's such a natural like-mindedness between our nations. And so as Ambassador Frederickson already mentioned, a number of areas of our cooperation that is active and propelling forward in many areas. Arctic science and research, the Canadian High Arctic Research Station, CHARS, and Polar Knowledge Canada have very close links with Norway, and both of us work together under the rubric of the University of the Arctic. On Indigenous issues, the Sami of Norway have long-standing links with Indigenous peoples of Canada's Arctic and cooperate and exchange across a wide range of areas. Ocean management, Ambassador mentioned the high-level panel for sustainable ocean economy, the highest level of cooperation. I would also say Canada and the Canada-European Economic Area Free Trade Agreement, the CEFTA, covers 90% of all goods traded between our countries and provides opportunities to support the Arctic and Northern policy agenda. Educational exchanges and the youth are behind all of these initiatives as we build forward our cooperation. So I think I will wrap with that because I think I'm now getting into the point of just repeating how like-minded Norway and Canada are, and we will now defer to those who will speak to us about how to bring that relationship forward. So thank you for the opportunity to be here today, and I look forward to the rest of the conference.
Thank you so much. We're now going to turn to hearing what it means to be young in the Arctic with representatives from both Canada and from Norway. And our first speaker is Crystal Martin Lipensky, who's originally from Saniarayat, Nunavut, and she was president of the National Inuit Youth Council and worked with the Inuit Circumpolar Council. She has worked tirelessly to improve the mental health infrastructure of Inuit and to explore the effects of climate change on Arctic life. And I welcome you now to come up.
Udlakut koyanami udlume tunga suktitaw kun nakama Crystal Martin Lipensky yunga sanagayak Nunavut mutak sayaw yunga mana kadluna nunangani laktunga. Good morning, everyone. I'd first like to start off by thanking the Norwegian Embassy and the Ambassador for this invitation today to speak with all of you. And to welcome those who flew into Canada recently and those that commuted, like myself, into the city and those joining virtually. My name is Crystal Martin Lipensky. I am originally from Saniarayat, Nunavut, which is formerly known as Hull Beach, and I am now residing in unceded and unsurrendered territories of the Anishinaabe, Algonquin Anishinaabe people. Indigenous peoples Indigenous peoples' history and our ways of being is always centered around collaboration, respect, and stewardship. It is how we survived as Indigenous peoples in the lands in which we occupy. Taking care of our environment has always been a necessity to ensure that nature would in return someday help us. So when I think about sustainability in the Arctic, I think of collaboration. with our governments, heads of states, with researchers, scientists, and decision makers who have active involvement of Indigenous peoples and support free, prior, and informed consent. I also see involvement with young Indigenous peoples of the Arctic, but the involvement should and shall engage in decision making and provide opportunity for Indigenous youth to participate actively as apprentices and not necessarily as interns. Interns is a term widely used as a Western society and does not account to how Inuit or Indigenous peoples learn from an elder or learn from those that have been in position for some time. Indigenous youth are constantly called upon to engage in important dialogue regarding our future, whether this is our aspirations or changes we'd like to see. Yet when changes are occurring or policy changes that are being made, Indigenous youth are not at those decision-making tables. We see a lot of engagement, a lot of conversations, but we do not actively see decisions based on Indigenous youth recommendations. Just a few weeks ago, I had the pleasure and honor to attend COP26 in Glasgow, Scotland with Inuit Circumpolar Council. There, I heard a fellow Inuk make her remarks, and it couldn't be more precise and more true to being an Indigenous person. And her comment was that Indigenous knowledge needs to be recognized like researchers and scientists are recognized. And this is factual. Indigenous peoples know every nook and cranny when it comes to our environment, our land, our waters, and the impacts or potential impacts of the land and waters in which we have seen our entire lives. So as Indigenous peoples of the Arctic, Inuit work collaboratively, as it was mentioned, with our fellow Indigenous peoples in the Arctic, such as the Samis. And there we discuss Arctic policy issues, and we work collaboratively to ensure that Indigenous peoples of the Arctic are recognized and are being included in decision-making. If you don't already know, the Samis are Indigenous peoples whose traditional territories span across Sweden, Finland, Russia, and Norway. And as Indigenous youth of the Arctic, we have been supported by our own organizations to build our knowledge, to voice our concerns, and to actively engage in decision-making to our communities. And this has proven to be effective. We have been able to achieve mentorship, the transfer of knowledge between one Indigenous person to another, and it also has created long-term sustainability within our communities. However, heads of state need to follow suit and also lend a supporting hand, involving Indigenous peoples at decision-making tables as it relates to Arctic issues, and also ensuring that Indigenous youth are part of those conversations and are part of the decision-making process. The power of collaboration can really benefit everyone. One of the values and beliefs that Inuit follow is called Inuit Kawimayak, which are also known as IQ principles. And these principles guide our organizations, it guides our communities, and it guides our families in the generations to come. And if you really look at the IQ principles, you can really relate this to your own life. It's very transferable. It's all about collaboration. It's all about consensus-based. It's about being stewards to the environment, to our communities, and it's really all about ensuring that we respect each other and have conversations that are tough, but conversations that need to be done. And so for Inuit Kawimayak, I believe that we can all follow and work together for a common purpose that ensures a sustainable Arctic and a sustainable Indigenous peoples for the future to come. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Next up is Martin Gamst Jonsson, and if you're very sharp-eyed, you will notice that he showed up in the video that the ambassador showed right at the very beginning. He's joining us today from Tromsø, Norway, and it was a long journey to get here just a couple of days ago. So thank you for making the trip. Martin Jonsson has been a passionate advocate for the participation of youth in the political process and has been head of Tromsø's Youth Council and deputy head of the Barents Regional Youth Council, working with members from Finland, Russia, Sweden, and Norway. Please welcome him.
I will not pretend that I know any French or Inuit language, so my English will have to do. First, I would like to say thank you very much for the invitation here today. I am deeply humbled and honored to be able to speak to you. First, I would like to communicate the beliefs, or say that I'm very honored to communicate the beliefs and hopes of the future generations. And I was intrigued by the question that was phrased here today. How do we support and strengthen our Arctic regions and communities? It is a very interesting question. Thankfully, I do have the answer. I believe to achieve this goal of strengthening the Arctic cooperation is essential. Many of the challenges we face here in the North is a common denominator of our geographical location, and the challenges and boundless opportunities that accompany that fact. And through international cooperation and friendship, these challenges we face will become opportunities. This is what I see here today. The road of friendship between Canada and Norway is something that we will walk together, and something that I will know that will change the future for the better. As a Norwegian that comes from the north of Norway, I would like to tell you about something that I am very, very proud of. It is something that Norway possesses. It is the most important resource that Norway has. It is youth democracy. In Norway, in every municipality and every single county in the entire country, you are required by law to have a youth council that can advise local government on policy and legislation. Everywhere in the entire country. Also, there is a tremendous focus on including youth people in important platforms where they can be heard, and also from the bottom of the municipality level all the way until the international level. Like conferences where you have leaders from the entire world, like Arctic Frontiers Conference in Tromsø, where the government has made it a very, very important issue to have the Youth Council of the county open the conference every year. And also, the best form of youth engagement is the Arctic policy for young people. This one right here. Note the color scheme. It was made this way so you would notice it. The best form of youth engagement is this plan, the Arctic Policy for Youth. It is a document made by young people to give input on the government white paper of the Arctic, which is something that determines Arctic policy for Norway for the next 5 to 10 years. So we made our own to just show them this is the future. Read it, share it. It is the greatest thing since sliced bread. The last thing I would like to mention is the work of the Barents Cooperation. With Norway as chair of the Barents Euro-Arctic Council, it has been a great success. Their focus on youth has been historic. During the chairmanship, the Youth Council, the Barents Regional Youth Council, was always represented during their conferences to speak about topical issues affecting youth. We passed a new Barents Youth Program for the period of 2021 to 2024, and also we held our own youth summit in Tromsø the 26th of October, where the ministers of foreign affairs from Norway, Sweden, Finland, and Russia attended, as well as representatives of Iceland and Denmark and the EU as well. The Barents Corporation is something that we can be proud of, but I would like to give the challenge to the government of Norway and Canada to support the establishment of an international youth council in the Arctic, a so-called Arctic Youth Council, so young people can finally have a voice about what happens in the Arctic. If you want us to stay, you will need to listen, and the creation of this Arctic Youth Council, with hopefully the support of all the Arctic nations, will secure a very strong future and a very strong foundation of how young people can communicate their issues in terms of how we face the everyday problems. If we are able to establish this youth council, I believe the future will indeed be bright, and it will be indeed something that young people can look forward to. So I will say thank you very much. I'll go and take a seat now.
Thank you very much. Thank you. We're going to have a conversation now, and I wonder, thank you for your comments, both very, very thoughtful. You know, one of the things is I've been sitting here listening, I mean, I'm a journalist, so I'm thinking of questions, but we've talked a lot about how similar our countries are when it comes to the Arctic, and what I'm interested in hearing from you is how they are different. And I wonder if you might start, Crystal.
How are they different?
Yeah. What do you see?
I think all of us will have a different perspective of the Arctic. And for me, it's coming from a lens of an Inuk, one who has been born and raised in the Arctic, and half of my life in southern Canada, but traveling all across Inuit Nuna, which is Inuit homelands. You know, what we see is a lot of challenges. You know, where a lot of scientists or researchers see opportunities, we see challenges. And it comes with a lot of the issues around infrastructure deficit, food security, lack of educational opportunities, lack of employment opportunities. And so what we do is we see the opportunity in creating our own resources, essentially, and ensuring that we reclaim, we preserve and protect our homelands and our traditional practices, many of which we're trying to revive because it's been, you know, almost depleted from us through colonization. And so we see the opportunities in ensuring that our culture remains within our communities, that we don't have to fear such a drastic climate change as well that we're seeing already, the erosions in our communities, the water levels that are rising, and there's so many challenges that we see. But the opportunities that we see as well is strengthening our self-determination to govern our own affairs. We've been challenged with so many socioeconomic disparities that we're really trying to work towards enhancing everything through the revitalization of our cultural and traditional practices. And so that's what I see in Canada, living here in Canada. I'm not sure, what Martin's perspective will be, but I really do hope to see more self-determination within our communities.
Just out of interest, when you watched the ambassador's video at the beginning, did that look like the North that you know?
Actually, there was a lot of similarities, when looking at some of the images that were there. It reminded me of Nunavut. It reminded me of the Arctic. And there's certainly a lot of, I think, landscapes that can really be confusing. And sometimes you might feel like you're in your own country. But I think the difference really comes down to, the language, the traditions, and the cultures.
And what about you? What do you think the differences are?
The differences, I think there are a lot of differences in terms of just the small things, just the way that we approach problems and just the day-to-day things. Like I've been walking around just watching like, well, they do it different here, but it works. I think just because something is different does not mean that the end result will necessarily be that much different. But I think probably the biggest thing for me is just the way like the government is approached by young people. Like how, if you're a young person, you see a problem. If I, like for me as a Norwegian, I'm a young person, I see a problem in my town, in my community, whatever, I know, okay, I can fix that. I call this person, I say, all right, this is a problem here, can you fix it for me? And they're like, yeah, sure, do you want a meeting? Yeah, sure. And then like, you get the ball rolling. Then you get a meeting, you talk to somebody, they fix the problem. Just the closeness of the democracy in Norway is truly incredible. You can, even ministers, you can just call them and ask for a meeting. It will probably take some time, but they will meet you. So I think that is probably the biggest thing that was a little shocking to me. The distance between young people and their own government, it was much larger than I was used to. So yeah, it will probably have to be that. Because in Norway, you can just ask anyone to fix something and they will listen to you, probably.
Yeah, probably. The man has faith. You know, one of the other things that you mentioned, Crystal, that really got me thinking is, I'm just going to quote you because I thought it was you talked about, having the tough conversations. And what are those tough conversations?
I think the tough conversations really is about reconciliation. And though our government has been working towards reconciliation and building relationships with Indigenous peoples across the country, there's still a lot of tough conversations to have, and those tough conversations is really about dismantling the oppressive and discriminative system that has been created by Canada when it was created, essentially. And that's what's, I think, tough, is having those conversations. But that toughness isn't about, hate between an individual. We need to look at the common purpose that we have, which is dismantling the system and not pointing fingers. It's about, okay, we recognize what has been created here is an issue and it's a barrier to Indigenous peoples. So let's have those conversations of what discrimination is, what racism is, what equality is, and changing those into positive things. How can we ensure that we're creating a safe and inclusive government that can, where Indigenous peoples feel like their voices, their history is recognized and appreciated.
I mean, one of the things that has struck me today, and even earlier when I was speaking with with the ambassador, for example, from Norway about this event, is the access to education that it seems there appears to be in Norway compared to what we've got here. I mean, I have many friends who've had to come south to go to high school, for example, much less university, and I'm wondering if that's a piece of this. And how will that get fixed, do you think?
In terms of education, I think it is one of the many key aspects of what is going to help you create a resilient population in the Arctic. If you have higher education, it will be much easier for you to create your own endeavors or also join other endeavors in terms of research, in terms of creating a business, in terms of developing the society around you. So definitely higher education is very, very important. And in Norway, of course, you have great access to higher education, but also there is a problem with the urbanization of it. Like if you live not in a city, you have to move to a city to get education. And that is a very, very problematic aspect for people who do not want to live in cities or who want to stay in their, well, home, essentially. And also in terms of including indigenous people in different processes and aspects, I think that the Barents cooperation, where I am from, the 13 most counties in Norway, Sweden, Finland, and Russia, in every aspect and every decision that is taken, indigenous people are included. There is a dedicated working group that work with indigenous issues. Also in terms of the Youth Council, we also have a member of the indigenous people in the Barents region that is present there and helping us develop policy and discussing issues. Also, our meeting, we have a conference once a year, is dedicated to indigenous people. So this aspect of the way we do things is looked up like indigenous people are part of who we are, like as a region, as a society. So it would only make sense to include them. So yeah, I hope you figured it out. Yeah.
In terms of the education, what do you see, Crystal? How does that get resolved?
There's a lot of, yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I think reconciliation is part of that, right? Inuit have also been part of the residential school system and the federal day school system as well. And so we're trying to build back trust with the federal and territorial governments. Though we are not where we should be, we are working towards that. I know Inuit Tapahik Kanadami, ITK, is looking at an Inuit Nunangat University, which would be very, would create a lot of opportunities for Inuit to engage in higher level education within our region. We see a lot of challenges with Inuit coming from Inuit Nunangat having to leave their home communities. They're leaving their entire support system into this completely foreign location and urban centers that can, be very overwhelming for many people who are used to living in, less than 600 people in a community. They're now living in this residence of 600 people in one building, right? So it's a dramatic change. And I think, with our Inuit regional organizations, our national and international Inuit organizations, they're working towards trying to solve this barrier and create more opportunities for Inuit in the north.
So it's a real key then.
Yeah.
To the. Okay. And with that, I believe we're out of time. But thank you so very much. Really appreciate your thoughts today.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. We're now turning to the section of the program that deals with academic science and research. And we have two of the world's absolute top Arctic scientists here to talk about this. Our first is Martin Fortier, who is an Arctic oceanographer at l'Université Laval, and he is the founding executive director of the ArcticNet network of centers of excellence, which spans 1,000 scientists and managers across 30 Canadian universities, aiming to figure out how we can cope with climate change and globalization in the Arctic. This is if you're a journalist like me who writes about science, this is just a gold mine. This is the premier institution for drawing together all of the Canadian research that's going on in this part of the world, even as it changes so dramatically. He is also the executive director of Sentinel North, which brings together hundreds of Quebec researchers of the North. Will you please help me welcome Martin Fortier?
Thank you for this kind introduction, but I'd like to correct, there are actually great scientists here. I'm probably not one of them, I'm more so a manager. And I also would like to acknowledge the presence of the current executive director of ArcticNet here, which I didn't know was here, but would be a great person to talk to after this talk. So thanks a lot. these talks this morning have been very enlightening, and in 7 minutes I've been asked to talk about collaboration in research, not to describe to you or even try to describe to you agendas and priorities and how Arctic science works in Canada, which would take me at least the morning. But I think the talk before us and that video clearly showed us that even though we have a lot of things in common, our Arctics are very different at all levels. If you've had the great pleasure to go to Tromsø, Norway, it's much more similar in St. John's or Halifax than it is at Iqaluit or Inuvik. So very different. Svalbard, where this photo was taken, is similar to our Arctic, and that's where you probably recognize some of the landscapes, but people-wise, they're two different countries, and we have two different priorities also as it relates to research. And I think the presentations on the new framework certainly showcases that, the issue of co-development of research, reconciliation. Even though we don't have an Arctic science strategy or policy in Canada, this would reflect that reality in that framework. Norway has an Arctic science policy that they've evaluated again in 2017, and you could say very different realities that reflect this policy. Whereas also the Arctic and the Barents Sea especially is a major economic driver of Norway with fisheries and oil and gas. Our Arctic is not in some ways. So that's two different drivers and political drivers about investment in Arctic science. And Norway has a much more global view, I would say, of Arctic issues. And now, as you can see with reconciliation and the major issues we have here, we can see that Canada is focusing more kind of internal in some ways, but at still wanting to be a leader internationally. So we are still very also active in international programs. So this clicker. So some of us have been, a testimony to our age, have been involved in these Canada-Norway collaboration in Arctic or Arctic research for almost 15 or 20 years now. And I went through my slides, and this came from 2014 meeting we had in Boston in this transatlantic forum with the US. But Norway, the Research Council of Norway had done a great job actually of looking at publications and filing on collaborations and establishing these roadmaps for collaborations with Canada at all levels, and stating that Arctic research was certainly one of the main focus, and especially in these topics of climate change, marine research, resources and energy. And one thing that was also clear, and I think is still the case today, is most of these collaborations are really from bottom-up initiatives. So research level, programs like ArcticNet or smaller programs, talking with their colleagues in Norway, coming up with collaborations, small MOUs. But there was really a truly strategic, if you want, bilateral agreement to try to focus our efforts in collaboration in Arctic research. We still managed to do great things, and those are some of them. There have been numerous large-scale international programs, either led by Canada, Norway, or other countries, where Norway and Canada played a leadership role. So I'll talk a bit about the Amundsen icebreaker later, but most of these large-scale IPY projects, the International Polar Year projects, had major collaborations between Norway and Canada. We talked about youth, at least at the university level, there are large amounts of exchanges and student mobility between the two countries and different universities in the countries. And also PhD school in Longyearbyen and Eunice, and in Arctic and Canada and Arctic, also bringing students from both countries together. We also, I would say, play a leading role, some of our researchers, in Arctic Council Working Group assessments. So whether it's AMAP on contaminants or CAF on biodiversity, there are still very, very active countries in leadership role in these major assessments. Also, one thing regarding research collaboration, there was mention of Arctic Frontiers Conference. So we've been involved since the beginning in the organization of Arctic Frontiers more early on, but the same way the ArcticNet Arctic Change Conference that's been going on every few years here, a very large international conference, also has a large Norwegian participation, and they were also involved in the organizing committee early on. And then more concretely, we have these small MOUs between institutions, and those are relatively small, but they are really the ones where things actually happen in some cases, so bottom up with different organizations. This MOU was first signed with ArcticNet in 2027, but we've been renewing this MOU with UIT in Tromsø. And this is just an example of one that's more concrete. Normally these are pretty I would say soft, just signed to increase collaboration and invite each other to meetings, etc. But in this case, we had an opportunity that's not that frequent in university, but to have money, both sides to invest about $1.5 million to really have a call for proposal, to encourage our researchers to get together, put their strengths together, their capacity together, to answer some questions. And those are the projects that were funded, are still ongoing, as one example of projects that are going on. I think one sort of low-hanging fruit, if you want, for collaboration without large agreements is really to share and maximize the use of our research infrastructure. And Canada is a vast country, as you saw. We have many different types of research infrastructure from, I'll show pictures of the CHARS later, but ship-based, we have stations all across northern Quebec, from Sandwich Nordique, the Arctic Research Foundation, small vessels. So we have a whole suite of territorial also colleges and stations that are being operational and are open for collaboration with Norwegians. So one example is certainly the Amundsen icebreaker that was first questioned in 2003, after, obviously, Old Amundsen. And that right from the beginning was really this infrastructure was funded by the Canadian Foundation for Innovation for international collaboration. And the name was there to represent success and also this great explorer. But we've had major participation from Norwegian scientists. Actually, the one who's speaking right after me is one of them. She was there at the launch of the Amundsen. It's also been used for collaboration with industry, including our Norwegian oil industry in the Labrador Sea. We did some work on the impact of iceberg drifting ice islands and iceberg in the Labrador Sea. The ship is equipped with a lot of state-of-the-art Norwegian equipment, sounding equipment, etc., and that we use daily and work with Norway. And it's also part of this collaborative agreement with the EU, where we can exchange ship time between different icebreakers. So I have our Canadian scientists go on Norwegian, the Kronprinshaken that you'll hear about later, and vice versa to welcome scientists on board the Amundsen. A major player, obviously, is the Polar Knowledge Canada, was mentioned earlier, a recently formed federal government agency that's responsible for the kind of an overarching view of this federal investment in Arctic science, but also represents Canada internationally. But also, maybe importantly for collaboration, it operates this beautiful research station. If you have an opportunity, not a lot of you have probably been there. It was inaugurated in 2019, but as you know, since then, most of the Arctic isn't accessible for COVID. But it probably looks like that, pretty new, maybe not a lot of dust on it. But David Hick has just been named new scientific director, and there's a large, obviously initiative to try to house and support programs, and I think that's one area where we could certainly collaborate in Arctic science. One last example, just in Quebec, similar ways that these groups are getting together. In Quebec, in the province of Quebec, as you know, a large section of the province is Nunavik, an Inuit region of Nunavik. And we have a long history of research in the Arctic, in the province of Quebec and Université Laval also. And we are bringing all these groups together under the Institut Nordique du Québec, with also planning to build a new institute. But also this was recently awarded the host as the Arctic Council's SDWG Secretariat in Quebec City. And as you can see, the research priorities are very similar than the ones from Norway. But again, with a very large co-creation, co-development involving indigenous communities in setting up the research and doing the research. So just to end on this, there is a long history of collaboration between our countries. I don't think we do enough. We should do more. But we should certainly build on research. Yes, we have very different issues, but we also have very common issues and strengths. And climate change impact was mentioned, ship-based marine research. One thing that I didn't put there, but the blue economy is certainly a large endeavor for the Arctic, I think, in Arctic research, that we can learn a lot from each other. And we need to expand and really develop better these opportunities of sharing our infrastructure. Norway has a brand new icebreaker, research icebreaker, which we won't have for many decades. But we have a beautiful research station that, I don't know, they may have anytime soon, I guess. But there's a lot of opportunities there. And really, these bottom-up collaborations are where things are happening. You can't have these bilateral national agreements without the scientists actually wanting to do the research and wanting to work at it. But it really helps these bottom-up collaboration when there are high-level agreements and overarching umbrella agreements. And I think we need to work more on this. So I'll leave it there right now, but again, very happy to talk with you. Many scientists, many people, obviously representing all kinds of fields of research that do collaboration are in the room, and if we have time to discuss, I would welcome them to join in. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Our next scientist is Marit Reichstad, who is a professor of marine ecology at the Arctic University of Norway in Tromsø. And she will be talking about what is happening in the Arctic Ocean and the Barents Sea. She's going to be explaining all this to us virtually. Welcome.
Thank you very much for this kind introduction. And thank you also very much for the nice overview introduction by Martin Fortier. I will dive more into examples of our research collaboration. And you can see on the image of the screen here a picture of several of my colleagues, including PhDs and postdoc students that participated research cruise on the Amundsen last month. This was one of the projects which was in the agreement between the University of Tromsø and the Laval University. So they were able to participate the Dark Edge campaign to investigate behavior and activity by organisms as we are approaching the dark period. The University of Tromsø has a strategy saying that we would like to be in the forefront, in the international forefront, in the following areas of knowledge. It's energy, climate, society and environment, technology, health, welfare and quality of life, community development, democratization and sustainable use of resources, all touching upon what we have heard earlier. And the university in Tromsø has 10 campuses around in northern Norway and Svalbard, 10,000 students, and 10% of them are international students. 30 English-taught master and bachelor degree program, and many of the science program also offer different specialization, and there are no tuition fees. There are a lot of student exchange agreements between UIT and Canada, including 36 programs with 11 different Canadian universities. And the subjects include natural sciences, engineers and construction, governance and indigenous people and tourism, all topics which has been mentioned as very important for both of our countries. And the 6 projects that were funded by bilateral agreement between UIT and University of Laval that was enabling more collaborative effort than we have had before. I will give you some examples on the themes where we collaborate, and climate change and ecosystems and their response to environment, climate and how organisms are responding are very important in the North. This first example on long-term collaboration includes terrestrial ecosystems, and there are collaboration between the Bylot Island in Canada and the COOT Observation Initiative in Norway, having observatories both on the mainland in the north and on Svalbard. They build observatories to map climate change and ecosystem response, and also to make this comparable across the Arctic. We have Norwegian scientists participating in the Kitikmeot Sea Science Study, where they observe and map climate change and ecosystem response in coastal areas, and especially looking at impact from Pacific estuarine waters, fresh water from the drainage areas, and the tidal component. And learning about coastal impact is also a learning progress between different regions. And another project that actually is addressing organisms' colors and using artificial intelligence and image analysis to be able to detect them by satellites and figure out where patches are. These are important key organisms in the food web. These projects all include student involvement on all levels. There are student exchange, there are co-supervision across the different countries, there are Professor 2 positions, there are method developments, and it's also collaboration with industry. Another brand new project from 1st of November this year is the BREATH project, where one of our associate professors, in collaboration with a Canadian colleague, got a prestigious grant from the Research Council of Norway. It's a young talent project, also including PhD students and postdocs. The topic is investigation of respiration and nutrient exchange of the plants under the sea ice that are in big change now with climate change. And she has planned to utilize some of this infrastructure that Martin Fortier mentioned, Cambridge Bay fieldwork, and also the mesocosms of the University of Manitoba that have sea ice experimental facilities. And it was also mentioned the mapping of or the biodiversity and the work within the Arctic Council working groups, and especially circumpolar Arctic flora and fauna, where both Canadian and Norwegian and colleagues in Tromsø are working and contributing quite a lot, and especially with focus on the sea ice and the sea floor, where both it's important to map communities because a lot of them are not well known, but also to map the changes that are taking place. Another population includes fish. Here we have been working on population genetics on both polar cod, capelin, and the North Atlantic cod. And the aim is to investigate if the genetic traces can give us a clue on how they are adapting to the different local areas in Norway. And we have recently established a collaboration to Canada to also investigate the same in the Canadian populations. And when we learn more about local adaptations, we may also be able to say something more about how these fish species are able to cope with a changing climate. And the last example is on the health and contaminants. There is a collaborative framework, the search, where time trends of contaminants are important and of emerging concerns for the Arctic population. There is a geographical difference, and we see that in this figure from the AMAP report, reporting on the mercury concentrations in blood, both in Arctic region and non-Arctic region. And we see that there are higher levels in the Arctic, but also major geographical variability. So in general, a lot of larger Norwegian research collaboration have actually been inspired by Canada. These two men, Paul Wassmann and Stig Falk Petersen, were stuck in Canada after the 9/11 event in 2001, and they had been listening to discussions about the Arctic Net establishment, about the cases overwintering with Amundsen, and was inspired to actually form the Norwegian research network Arctos that was established in 2002. That has been also very important for PhD education in Norway. The Nansen Legacy was established in 2018, and it's also a national strong collaborative network and research project of about 200 scientists. So having these collaborative efforts and units, I think, has been instrumental both in Norway, and we have learned that from the Canadians. And Paul Wassmann has also been instrumental in integrating workshops since 2002, strengthening the Norwegian-Canadian links through both synthesis papers, comparing Arctic ecosystems, as we do with this collaborative research project I have exemplified, conceptual models to understand systematic differences and similarities, and also student exchange. So in general, Norway and Canada share interests, and these are reflected in a spectrum of fruitful research and education collaboration. And you are very welcome to join us on our research vessel, Kronprins Haakon. I have not included a lot on that yet, but you're welcome whenever. Thank you.
Thank you so much. That was brilliant. We have 2 more speakers, and then we're going to have a small Q&A section after that, so get your questions ready if you have any. Mathieu Parker is the director of the Arctic Council Secretariat in Tromsø, and he's speaking to us virtually from there. So he was the most senior Canadian federal official in Nunavut before he went to that position, and he has been key in helping the public understand what's at stake in the Arctic. Please help me welcome Mathieu Parker.
Hi, good afternoon. Thank you for that introduction, and thank you for the opportunity to speak with you today. So my name is Mathieu Parker. I started here in my new role with the ACS only in late September here in beautiful Tromsø, Norway, and as mentioned before making the move to Tromsø over the summer, my family and I spent the last 5 years in Iqaluit, Nunavut, where I held the position of Vice President of Pan-Territorial Operations for the Canadian Northern Economic Development Agency. So it's a position that really allowed me to travel across the Canadian Arctic and visit a number of beautiful communities and meet great people. So while I consider myself fairly well versed in Canadian Arctic issues, as you can imagine, I'm still very much in learning mode here in my new role, but super excited for the opportunity to get to know a different corner of the Arctic and tackle issues, Arctic issues on an international scale. So obviously, given that I've only been here in Norway for a little under 3 months, it would be presumptuous of me to pretend that I could undertake any sort of comparative analysis of Norwegian and Canadian societies. And so when thinking about the theme for this event and what I might be able to offer to the conversation today, I decided to focus more just on my own takeaways from my professional and personal experience over these last few years. And one of the first things that came to my mind when thinking of my experience in the Arctic is how much it truly is a land of contrast, and how difficult it can be to fully grasp the Arctic reality if you haven't had the opportunity to really live it day to day. It's something I find that's really fascinating, because I feel like when you hear about the Arctic in the media, it oftentimes tends to be portrayed as more, one big homogeneous block of snow and ice. And yet, if there's anything that my 5 years spent traveling in the Canadian Arctic have taught me, it's how vast and diverse it truly is, be it from a climatic, demographic, infrastructure, or socioeconomic perspective, and how different the issues and challenges that are faced by the different Canadian Arctic communities are as well. Back when I was working for Canada and Nunavut, we used to make fun of our colleagues in Yukon when they complained about winter, given how light their winters tend to be relative to those in Nunavut. And it's always fascinated me to see such a difference, considering both Iqaluit and Whitehorse sit roughly at the same latitude. But coming here to Norway these past few months, it's been amazing to witness how Tromsø brings that Arctic contrast to a whole new level with the unique climate that it benefits from here as a result of the jet stream, even though it's sitting on the 69th parallel, way higher than Iqaluit. But yet with much milder weather and an ocean that remains accessible all year round. And of course, from an infrastructure standpoint, is really day and night from my experience over the last 5 years in Nunavut, of course. Similarly, on the demographic front, very interesting to look at contrast across Canadian territories and Arctic as well as the Arctic as a whole. Where you have a few large agglomerations like Tromsø that are dotted across the circumpolar Arctic, which have the critical mass and transportation infrastructure that allows them to benefit from significant services and economic diversification, versus these smaller, inaccessible communities that are completely isolated from the modern world, with significant unemployment, health, social infrastructure issues like the ones that are plaguing Iqaluit's water supply at the moment, even though you would think that Iqaluit, by Canadian Arctic standard, is a relatively large community. Finally, well, I'm only starting to scratch the surface when it comes to my understanding of Scandinavian history and politics. It's been fascinating to see how these have influenced Arctic development in the Nordic countries relative to Canada, where the complex federal, territorial, indigenous government matrix continues to have a significant impact on large infrastructure projects, for example, and the regulatory process that's in place across the territories. Another factor that I feel has impacted development of the Canadian North is the fact that Northern development and Canadian Arctic sovereignty have historically often found themselves sort of intertwined into national politics, which has meant that investments have often ended up getting caught up in the political cycle. And this in turn has tended to place the focus on short-term results that aren't necessarily coherent with the need for a longer-term Arctic strategy and not aligned with the on-the-ground capacity for delivery of these initiatives. So in that sense, it'll be really interesting to see how efforts underway through the NPF can hopefully help influence that, but also how some of the developments on the Indigenous self-determination front, most notably Inuit Tapirit Kanatami's push for a whole of Inuit Nunangat policy approach, or Nunavut Tunngavik Incorporated's aspirations towards self-government, how those things may end up impacting the Northern political landscape over the coming years. So these next two slides I will glance over very quickly. They're actually ones that I used a number of times in my previous role, and I see from Heidi's presentation earlier that my stats are probably a little old at this point anyways. But I thought it's always helpful to just sort of bring, to help frame the discussion and emphasize how different the Northern Canadian reality is relative to that of Southern Canada or Norway, for that matter. So as you can see on this first slide here, when we're talking of the Canadian territories, we're talking about extremely small populations spread out across an extremely vast territory. And as you know, we're also talking about a very young population with an Indigenous population that ranges from 25% in the Yukon territory all the way up to 85% in Nunavut. And obviously that also has a significant impact on the social political landscape. It's also an economy that's relatively under-diversified and to some extent sort of still publicly funded, if you will, with the prevalence of the public sector even sort of ahead of the resource development sector in the territories. The second slide here, which also aims to put in perspective the impressive rate of growth of territorial populations and economies over the last 10 years, with the exception of NWT perhaps, which is facing more of a downturn as a result of the resource development portion of its economy. But these figures, again, are ones that I find really helpful in order to put into context some of the socioeconomic challenges that are faced by the territories, especially Nunavut, as they try to adapt to the rate of growth while still grappling with some fundamental issues from a socioeconomic and infrastructure standpoint. In contrast, over my short time here, it's been so impressive to see how much more diversified the Northern Norway's economy is relative to the Canadian territories. And I think that's in large part due, of course, to the jet stream and the impact of a more temperate climate on everything from marine transportation to permafrost to the construction season and the cost and availability of labor, but also to the critical mass from a population and infrastructure standpoint, as this is something that has in turn effects on economic opportunities and diversification and connectivity, but also on things like the availability and quality of health and education services, which, as we know, has ripple effects in terms of education levels, unemployment rates, as well as mental health and substance abuse, which are prevalent in so many of the smaller communities that don't have access to those services. So, of course, when thinking about potential areas of collaboration between Canada and Norway, I couldn't miss the opportunity to do a quick plug-in for my new employer. But based on my own Arctic experience over these last few years, I have to say, I really do feel like these 6 themes that have been identified by the Arctic Council as sort of its priority areas of focus are truly on point and encompass really all of the major areas for collaboration, be it in terms of Arctic peoples, so from a sustainable development, safety standpoint, as well as preservation of language and culture, climate change and biodiversity, of course, in terms of assessment, monitoring, and adaptation, and learning from each other's efforts. On the ocean front, I know I heard speak previously around the blue bioeconomy, but also the protection of the marine environment. And then emergency preparedness and response, which I think is becoming an increasing area of focus as the Arctic becomes increasingly accessible from both a shipping and a tourism standpoint. So even though, as we saw, from the small size of its economy, the Canadian North, as a standalone jurisdiction, if you will, cannot really be seen as a significant trading partner. It's interesting to see that in 2019, 60% of its $2.5 billion exports was actually destined to Europe. So while diamonds and precious metals make up over 90% of this amount, I think there remains significant untapped trade potential between Arctic Canada and Norway. And it was awesome to find a couple of weeks ago, actually, some Nunavut Kikkitaluk shrimp here at the local grocery store in Tromsø, considering that those are pretty much impossible to find in Canada. So anyways, beyond pure commercial trade, however, the area where I see the greatest potential for impact in terms of Canada-Norway collaboration in the coming decade is on the public policy and scientific research front. And I think there's opportunities for collaboration, exchange of lessons learned and best practices on many shared Arctic priorities of both countries. So namely, as I have here, climate change research and adaptation, where obviously there's already a lot of work that's underway through the Arctic Council working groups, but also opportunities for bilateral collaboration between establishments such as the CHARS in Canada, the UIT or Polar Research Institute here, sustainable resource extraction and renewable energy, where I see some opportunities both from a public and private sector partnership standpoint. Same in terms of fisheries and tourism sector development, where I think there's also some interesting opportunities in terms of active Indigenous participation in both sectors. Transportation and connectivity infrastructure, probably the area where greatest opportunity for private sector partnerships, as we can already see in Nunavut, where I know there's a Norwegian firm that's currently working with an Inuit company on a potential fiber optic project. And finally, as I come to learn more about Sami culture, history, and current challenges and opportunities, I'm really looking forward to learn more about some of the ongoing existing collaboration that's happening between Sami and Canadian Indigenous peoples, both through the Arctic Council and elsewhere, because I think there's really interesting opportunities for discussion around things like self-determination, preservation of culture and language, and active participation in the economic development of the Arctic on both sides. So with that, that concludes my modest contribution to the discussion for today. So I wanted to thank Ambassador Fredriksen for inviting me to take part in the discussion. And I guess we'll turn it to my new esteemed colleague, Morten Høglund, SAO for Norway.
Thank you so much. And indeed, the last word does come from your colleague, Morten Høglund, who is Norway's senior Arctic official. He is a longtime diplomat and politician who has a unique understanding of the Arctic, and please welcome him.
And it's a great pleasure to attend this seminar with so distinguished people. And it's truly been inspirational and also a lot of learning for myself about Canada's issues and role and opportunities. I will try to be brief. A lot of has been said. I can agree to almost everything, and so many issues of mutual cooperation and has been mentioned. And I just want to make some points. And I see, especially from our youth participants, they gave some very inspirational talks. And I think we are at a point in the work of the Arctic Council where we have to find a fitting format for engaging young people on the longer term. And this is now quite high on the agenda in the Arctic Council, and we look forward to push this issue and very much like to have Canada join us in finding a platform. We have demographic issues also in Norway. Population is increasing almost everywhere in Norway, except for the most northern part of Norway. And so we need to address this issue and see how we can create societies where young people find attractive, and we invest in young people. I also want to underline the importance of Arctic Council and Arctic cooperation. Norway places a strong emphasis on multilateral cooperation. We see Arctic Council has for 25 years now been the instrumental arena for knowledge sharing, trust building, and it's unique in the way states, indigenous groups come together and work together, sit together and talk in a consensus-based organization. But also how scientists, experts are tuned into the work regularly, daily. The working groups are the great value of the Arctic Council. And we benefit so much from all these people and the close interaction between decision makers, diplomats, and the people, indigenous groups, and so on, business people as well. It makes it unique. I think it's something we can even export as an idea to other parts of the world, because the trust building is really important. We do have ups and downs in international relations, but we see that they put emphasis on it, and we are able to attract the ministers to put time and effort into this work because it's important. It's important for the people living in these countries that we solve the issues. And we are now dealing with a huge climate crisis, which needs to be addressed. In the Arctic, we feel the crisis stronger than most places. But we can also do something on local or regional issues. And so we bring the global problem into a regional setting and see how can we address this issue with regional policy. The same with marine pollution. The same with how we can address with other pollutants, biodiversity, but also economic development. The whole of transport value chain, there are many global issues which we are facing at the moment, but we can address them within the Arctic framework. So the way I have great hopes for the future of the Arctic Council. In our part of the world, we also have other international arenas where we work together. The Barents Euro-Arctic Council has been mentioned, and we could possibly also look at the closer synergies between these different arenas. For us, the Barents Cooperation is very much a peace project. It was established closely after the Soviet Union fell apart, and it is a border, very much project across borders in this part of the world, people to people, business, young people, and so on. So on project basis, there are possibilities. We must say that we are, in our part of the world, we play a strong emphasis on our bilateral cooperation with Russia. And of course, this is highlighted also within the work of the Arctic Council. We work closely with Russia on environmental issues, on different security, emergency issues, having the border open and so on. And we are the only country bordering Russia who's never for 1,000 years have any war with Russia, which makes it's a unique historical context. So for us, we in the northern part of Norway, the relationship with Russia is very, very important. Russia is currently the chair of the Arctic Council. They give priority to many of these issues which we discussed today are the same priorities Russia gives priority. People in the Arctic, climate and environment, sustainable economic development, and strengthening of the Arctic Council. Norway will follow Russia as the chair of the Arctic Council in 2023, and we look forward to take many of these priorities into our chairmanship program and see where we can continue and strengthen. So there is, even if we are quite different as countries and we have different Arctic experiences, people are different, the challenges be somewhat different, there are many commonalities. And we have to try to see how we can learn from each other, how we can strengthen each other on issues which need to be addressed. So I think my last point is to underline also the importance to the outside world. And both Canada and Norway, we welcome observer countries, we welcome a global interest in the Arctic. It's quite natural. But we have to communicate that the Arctic is well regulated. It's not a lawless place. The UN Convention of Law of the Seas, of course. There are governance mechanisms which are in place. They can be strengthened, but they are there. There is not a need for a new governance mechanism in the Arctic. I think both Norway and Canada can communicate this as we do, and we can, with this existing framework, we are ready to engage with other partners who have quite obvious reasons for engaging with us. And I think we can benefit from that engagement. Thank you so much for the opportunity to take part.
Thank you so much. We're running a little bit over, but we still want to have time for a couple of questions if there are some from our audience here in Ottawa today. Does anybody have a question for one of our guests who is present in the room? There's a microphone there that you'll have to speak into. Does anybody have a question? A pressing, burning question about any of our No? Okay, well, thank you very much for being here then. I guess to wrap up, what's really struck me here is just how much the Arctic is part of the national identities of both Canada and Norway, and it's part of our global identity as well, and I think that's something that this morning has made extremely clear to all of us. So this is now officially the end of the program. Thank you so much, everyone, for being here, both in the room and online. Good morning.